Hello everyone, I'm Irene Taffrey-Weiner and I'm your host for this webinar, which is already the 10th webinar in our monthly series of the PCPLD network. Now today we're going to think about involving people with intellectual disabilities in end-of-life decisions. That's a topic that we can hear, that we get a lot of questions around. And because most of today's speakers are from outside the UK, I'm going to use the term intellectual disabilities because that is better understood outside England than learning disability. So really important topic, lots of questions about that. Most people would agree that it's important for people that people are included in decisions that affect their lives, and that includes the end of their lives. But how can you do that? Do people themselves actually want to be involved in the way that we might think? And when and how can we best involve people in those kind of decisions and at the end of their lives? So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm really excited about today's speakers. Here they all are, all lined up. And the timings. We have a really wide range of expertise, and that ranges from experiential expertise to academic expertise. As you will see, for various reasons, all those talks have been pre-recorded, but there are 4 of the speakers are here for a live discussion afterwards. That's Hille Vos, Hannah Norland, Freek Verlet and Michael Echteld. So do use the Q&A box for your questions and comments. Even if we don't have time to pick them up, we always read them very carefully and we may do something with them in the future. So ask your questions, share your own experiences about this really important and hot topic. If you're on Twitter, then do join the conversation using #PCPLD. And if you're a regular to our webinars, you will know by now that we always try to end with a song. And today's contribution is from United by Music. It's quite special, and I'll tell you a little bit more later, but I hope you stay with us until the end. We finish in 1 hour. Today's webinar is recorded. It will be uploaded onto YouTube soon, and if not tonight, then certainly by tomorrow. And you'll also be able to download a certificate of attendance then. But first of all, let's listen to Rosie Joustra. She is our first speaker. She works at and is supported by MacIntyre. And Rosie speaks as an expert with lived experience of having an intellectual disability. And it might be interesting to know that when I had this conversation with Rosie on Zoom a couple of weeks ago, I hadn't met her before. So just to see how this conversation goes and how we spoke for about half an hour, and I'm really grateful to you, Rosie. I know that you're watching this for talking to a complete stranger about quite a difficult topic, so thank you. Let's listen to Rosie first.
Being involved in end-of-life decisions, in conversation with Rosie Joustra, Health, Dementia and Wellbeing Assistant at MacIntyre. Starting the conversation with a story. This is John. He is very ill. He is going to die. John hates hospitals. He wants to die at home. Who decides whether John stays at home or goes into hospital?
I would just thought the parents, because usually they're his next of kin, they're his family.
Yeah. And do you think John could decide himself?
I think he probably could. At the end of the day, it's about what he wants. Well, nowadays, even if it means caring for someone at home. My mother had that. I don't care. She was in the care home to begin with. And it was by 1 o'clock on that Sunday when she passed away. My eyes were wide open. I put down shock.
Yeah. You remember that really well, don't you? Because it's a long time ago.
It was 1984.
Should we talk about death?
I'm always one for being open.
So it's really worth talking to someone then, even if it's hard.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
It might be hard to begin with, but it does get easier in time.
Should people think ahead to when they are going to die?
I guess at some point it's going to happen for very different reasons. It's a case of making sure that they've got what they need and being with them so they're not on their own.
So you might want to think about who you want to have around you, isn't it?
So it could be family, parents.
It sounds like you've got a great family and a great counsellor.
Okay.
Yeah. How about support workers? Would you talk to them about dying and death?
Probably. It depends how you take it. When I tell them, it's a case of that if I was going to start the conversation, it would mean, where do I start? It's a bit like saying, where do I begin? If you know what I mean. Because it's not an easy subject to talk about. I do have a key worker, and she's been fantastic. She would be the first person I would speak to.
But that's really interesting, Rosie, because it is a hard thing to start talking about, isn't it? As you say, where do you start? So would you prefer it if the support worker starts to talk about it first?
I wouldn't mind that. I definitely wouldn't mind that. It's a case of who starts that conversation first.
How could support workers start a conversation about death?
They would always put you at ease, so getting into it gradually from the start, and then from there you're going to build up on it. Building up on it usually helps.
But both Rosie and myself find it hard to really imagine that one day we will die.
I can't see that happening. Well, I don't know what my brothers would do if that did happen. I mean, I can still live. How can I put it? We'll put it this way, I'm not going anywhere. That's for certain. I've still got a long life ahead of me.
Of course.
I want to keep it that way.
Yes. I hope that's right, Rosie. That's right for a lot of people, isn't it? You've got many, many years, a long road ahead of you. Is it too early then to start thinking about those kinds of things, do you think? Or is it never too early?
Quite. I can only imagine becoming later on. It's not something you should go into straight away. That'd be my answer, because it's not something that you don't want it to let it happen too early in life. But it would be a case of talking it through with your key worker or family. In my case, it might be family. They would want the best for me.
Rosie, thank you. Your talk has made a brilliant start to our webinar. And I think all of you watching will agree that Rosie is an excellent speaker. And it just shows me how important it is to simply ask people's opinion on the things that we are thinking about and working with. And I'm picking up on just one thing you said, Rosie, and that was that whether you can talk to people about death depends on how they take it. And I've heard people say that before, that it really depends on relationships and trust. And that leads me to the next speaker who really is talking about relationships. And that's Dr. Jo Watson from Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. Now, Jo's research is unique because she focuses on involving people with severe and profound intellectual disabilities in decisions, including end-of-life decisions. And I'm really keen that we think about this, because even in inclusive research, even in inclusive conversations and webinars like this, people with profound disabilities are often excluded. So when I read Jo's research, I was really excited. I think it's wonderful, and I'm so delighted that she's agreed to talk to us. Now, of course, Jo is in Australia, where it's the middle of the night, so she's not here live. She has pre-recorded this talk for us. Thank you, Jo.
Oh, hi, my name's Jo Watson and I'm joining you from Australia, Deakin University. I'm going to present this paper with Dr. Hilaire Vos from the Nibel Institute in the Netherlands. She will join you afterwards to answer some questions. I'm giving this presentation on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and they are the traditional owners of the land that I'm joining you from here in Melbourne, Australia. I'd like to acknowledge that as a European descendant, I am a guest on this land. This land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So Hilaire and I are going to talk to you today a little bit, not so much about our research, but about a strategy that's come out of our research around using narrative to support end-of-life care for people with profound intellectual and multiple disability. So moving on, who are we talking about here? We're talking about people who communicate informally and sometimes unintentionally. So that means they will use a whole lot of body language, facial expression, eye contact, behaviours that some people might find challenging, a whole range of different communication systems that are not symbolic and are sometimes not intentional. We know that working in this area, there is a very strong attitude towards people with the most significant intellectual disability, a hierarchy of personhood almost. And that hierarchy is very much based on this idea that our personhood is linked to our cognition, that the more intellectual we are, the more human we are. So what we really would like to do is to change that narrative and think about personhood beyond this idea of cognition, that we are people because of our human connection with each other. We are people because of our engagement with the world. There are many, many other attributes of humanity, of personhood, than cognition. At the centre of Article 12 is this idea that we all have the right to live autonomous lives. We all have the right to be seen as people before the law. And to do this, there is a mechanism that has come out of the CRPD called supported decision making. But what I've seen within my practice and my research over the years is that supported decision making is being implemented with many people with cognitive disability. But once again, this group of people with PIMD, are often left out of the picture. So I have come up through my research with a definition of supported decision making for this group. And what this definition says is that people with PIMD experience supported decision making as an interdependent and complex process carried out between supporters and supported. Within this dynamic, both parties contribute differently. The person facing the decision contributes by expressing their will and preference using a range of informal communication methods like body language, facial expression, gesture, physiological reactions. Supporters contribute to the process by responding to this expression of will and preference through acknowledging, so doing three things: acknowledging, as opposed to ignoring, interpreting and acting on this expression. And so we came up with this model. This is a model of supported decision making where the mechanism is made up of two very clear roles: the role of the supported person who is expressing their will and preference, and the role of the supporter. And their role is to respond to that expression of will and preference by acknowledging, interpreting and acting on that. So this is what the model can look like for those of you who like a nice picture. I wouldn't be an academic if I didn't come up with some kind of picture. There's a range of things that really make this work, and that is supporters' attitude and perceptions of people's capacity to not only communicate but to make decisions. Also, how collaborative a circle of support is around a person, where systems barriers aren't necessarily in place. So there's a whole lot of things. But one of the things that we came up with that has come out of this research is the power of storytelling, the power of narrative in making this work. When we think about how do we know, how do we support someone to have their will and preference heard? But there's so much value in the use of narrative. So many of us are able to express ourselves by the stories we tell. And that's really important when we think about people with PIMD. How can we get to know people through their stories? One of the strategies that Colbine Ling, who's now a retired psychologist, so what he did was ask people who supported someone with PIMD questions like, what would their life look like beyond their disability if they had complete control over their lives? So this is some data from my PhD research, which where I asked supporters, circles of support, this question: if Nathan could eat what he wanted, what would he eat? He'd be a foodie, I reckon, you know, creamy, yummy cheese, flash wine, chocolate, the works. Why isn't he eating all those, you wonder? So we get a bit of an idea of who Nathan is, and we build this narrative. So we ask a lot of these kinds of questions. If she had control over her life, what would it look like? She'd just really love interacting with other people, singing, dancing, you know. She would have made a great cheerleader. He'd be comfortable but stylish. He wouldn't wear those tracky dacks. Now, tracky dacks in Australia are tracksuit pants. I think he would be quite social. He has the Scottish sense of humour. He would have had to have had a very fast car. I always thought he would be a courier or something like that. So we're developing a picture of him as to who he is by the stories that are told about him. And so what we do, and what I've been doing in my research, is collecting so much of this narrative, talking to people. And as a qualitative researcher, what we do all the time is to pull thematic themes from those narratives. But what we do is we do this collectively as a circle of support. So what are these themes? So looking at how we might apply this technique to a end-of-life situation for someone with PIMD, the context might be, this was participants in my research, participants were recalling the childhood of a man with PIMD they had known for many years, and collectively they came up with this narrative. So this was their conversation that we recorded and then worked with. Remember, he used to sit in the creek, love the water. He used to sit there for hours. Remember that time, Kev? That time in the old place where you destroyed the bathroom with all that splashing from the bath. It took us hours to mop it up, didn't it? And you did, and all you did was laugh, you rat bag. We used to take him up to blah, blah. He liked to go for a ride in the speedboat. We used to sit him in the speedboat, and he used to get excited with the water splashing and that sort of thing. And so collaborative interpretation, we come together with all of these stories, not just that, but lots and lots of stories, and we come up with something about what this conversation might mean. Kevin enjoys the sounds and textures of water. Full stop. So how could we apply that at the end of life for Kevin? So an advanced care plan for Kevin, it may detail that during his last days, he might like to be surrounded by water. He might like to be immersed in water, in that sensory experience. And he might also like to have lots of baths, and he might like to play in water. He might have a digital recording, a bubbling brook, say, because that was something that his supporters identified as relaxing. So another example, Nathan's circle of support were asked if Nathan had control over the stereo in the bus, what would he listen to? So the collective narrative there was, oh yeah, he likes like rock music, like AC/DC, something with a bit of guts. Yeah, you're right, something with guts, loud, loud, loud. Yeah, louder the better, hey? A deep, heavy bass, don't you reckon? Nirvana or maybe even Primus. So why aren't we listening to this in the bus? So that collaborative interpretation, Nathan likes heavy, loud music with a strong bass line. And then in applying that to decisions about his end of life, Nathan's advanced care plan may describe the music that might be played during his palliative care. We also might think about what music might be played at his funeral. So again, the context, Yuri's circle of support was asked if Yuri could live wherever he wanted, where would he live? What would his home look like? Where would he live? The collective was, here you can see here, he doesn't like being away from home and the people he knows well. The collaborative interpretation was Yuri likes a quiet, familiar environment away from hustle and bustle. And this is a place of well-being and comfort for him. And then applying that to the supported decision making, supporting him at the end of life. Yuri's advanced care plan may describe the environment that he would prefer to be at the end of his life. A quiet place, perhaps in the bush and away from the hustle and bustle, surrounded by a small circle of people he is very familiar with. So I'd like to dedicate this body of work to two men. Both died of aspiration pneumonia, a very preventable cause of death for many people with PIMD. Neil taught me about the essence of human connection. He taught me how to listen, not simply to words, but to sensory expression, sounds, cries, laughter, smiles, breath. And his wonderful mum and dad taught me what true advocacy means. And Yuri, you taught me how important it is to stop and smell those exquisite roses that are placed in our path. And you showed me how to embrace our sensory world. Cool running water, warm sunshine on my face, holding hands and the simple joy of humming to express contentment. And these men and their supporters have taught me more about living with, supporting and loving someone with PIMD than any academic paper, thesis or textbook ever could. And I'm just going to finish with a quote from my research. And this is from that case study that's represented in there. It's talking about this man's end of life and his funeral. This is a quote from his mother talking about having the jelly slice that he really liked at his funeral. It was everything we knew he wanted because, you know, we know him, love. We have known him all his life. And Dave reminded me, his cousin, he reminded me about the jelly slice that he loved before the pig when he was teeny tiny. So we had to have that after, didn't we? With a cuppa, you know, he would have loved it. So you can see this use of narrative has impacted even his funeral. So here are some references. I'll make sure that you have the PowerPoint presentation, so if you want to explore those, and some resources that you might be interested in. So I am going to stop sharing now and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Jo, thank you so much. I am excited about what you've talked about and what you've done, your research, for so many reasons. I mean, your examples are illuminating and they will really help us to see what real person-centered, inclusive decision-making looks like for people with profound disabilities, people who are not able to communicate in conventional ways. But I think it's also really useful for people who can talk in usual ways. I was struck, for example, Rosie, when I spoke to you, how important it is for me to know your story in order to understand what it is that you would want and what you'd need. And I think keep that in mind, because that will be the same when we hear from the next speaker and the next speakers. So I'll want to discuss, Jo, your research a little bit more, but I'll pick that up with Hille Vos afterwards, who is here to a colleague of Jo's who is here to answer our questions live, hopefully. So next I'm going to share just a short video with you that was made a couple of years ago, but it's still relevant. This is the GRASSroots group, who you've seen in these webinars before. So this is Michelle McDermott, Amanda Cresswell and David Jeffrey, and they are answering my question: if you were terminally ill, would you want to know, and why?
Yes, I think I'm ill, then I feel that I'm in my right to know how long I've got. I feel that It's my body, you know, regardless whether I have a learning disability. I might not really clearly understand if I have a profound learning disability, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I shouldn't be told.
Why would you want to know?
And to prepare myself.
And how would you prepare? What would you do?
Tell my family, myself. So it's not a shock for them.
Definitely planning my funeral, which I'm doing at the moment, and making the most of the life that I have by going on holiday and doing lots of different things.
I think, yeah, I think I would want to know if I had an illness, so I can suppress myself. I can arrange things so it doesn't put it on my partner too much. At least everything would be in place, because it's not only me who's got the illness, but you've got to look at a different other way of the loved ones you leave behind.
But it's going to be upsetting either way, because you're gonna die. You're dying. You're gonna die. So it is upsetting either way, because it's going to be upsetting because you're going to be leaving loved ones and friends behind. So that's going to be upsetting for you. So it's the same as not being told or being told. Okay, you might be told and you might forget, but at least you have been told. And that's my opinion.
Thanks, Michelle and David and Amanda. It's always really so good to talk to you and to hear your opinions. So thank you for your help with this. Now, next, I'm really pleased to introduce a research team from the Netherlands to you. That's Hannah Norland, Freek Vellet and Professor Michael Echteld. And they've developed a tool that can be useful in involving people with intellectual disabilities in end-of-life decisions, in the palliative phase, as they say. And that might also be useful just in planning ahead, advanced care planning. I've been on the sidelines of this project and I've seen it developing from a distance, which has been interesting. So I'm pleased that I'm now able to present this. They're here live, the team, to answer your questions later on. But here's an extract of a short film they made for us, in which they explain what they have done. And it's in Dutch with subtitles.
Ik ben Michael Echteld, projectleider palliatieve zorg bij Stichting Prisma. Prisma is een zorgorganisatie voor mensen met een verstandelijke beperking. Dit filmpje laat u zien hoe de onderzoekers Hannah Noorland van Erasmus MC en Freek Vellet van Stichting Prisma samenspraak hebben ontwikkeld en hoe samenspraak in de praktijk gebruikt kan worden.
Wij merken dat cliënten dat die het heel belangrijk vinden om mee te kunnen praten en mee te kunnen beslissen over de keuzes die zij kunnen maken in hun leven. Maar we merken bij medewerkers dat zij het ook heel prettig vinden dat zij een hulpmiddel hebben om iets bespreekbaar te maken.
Oh, ik ben Freek van dat. Sinds enkele jaren werk ik bij Pris. Maar ik zit in het cliëntenforum met een ervaringsdeskundige en ik werk op de communicatieafdeling van Pris. Maar eind 2018 heeft mijn coach mij gevraagd of ik co-researcher wil worden binnen het project Samenspraak. Hier heb ik geen moment spijt van gehad. Ik vind het heel erg interessant om te onderzoeken hoe wij mensen met een verstandelijke beperking kunnen betrekken bij de gezamenlijke besluitvorming in de palliatieve zorg.
Nadat we een opzet hadden van het stappenplan hebben we dit voorgelegd aan de projectgroep. De ervaringsdeskundigen hebben zich toen over dit stappenplan gebogen.
Nadat wij de feedback hebben wij de vragenlijst online verstuurd naar 98 experts. Onder die experts waren zorgprofessionals voor onze palliatieve zorgexperts en artsen. Na die consensus konden we verder aan de slag met de vormgeving van het stappenplan. We hebben allerlei soorten besproken, zoals een stoffenstappenplan, een app of een bordspel.
Wij hebben veel ervaring in werkvormen en praatkaarten werken heel erg goed. Evenals het ontwikkelen echt van een fysieke doos waarvan alles in zit, waar die mensen eigen kunnen maken.
Hallo, ik ben Petra van der Hout. Ik ben 40 jaar en ik ben ervaringsdeskundige bij Amarant. En wat ik vooral belangrijk vond is dat cliënten een box hebben waar ze allerlei dingetjes in kunnen stoppen, zodat het voor hun verwanten duidelijk is wat ze graag willen.
Wat vind je van hoe het eruit ziet en hoe je het
Ja, superleuk. Ik denk dat het belangrijk is dat de cliënten de laatste wens vast kunnen zetten en dat het de manier waarop daar nou met de spelvorm is gedaan uiteindelijk, ik denk dat het de juiste manier is.
En waarom is het de juiste manier, denk je?
Omdat je bij cliënten, bij de ene cliënt moet je toch op een speelse manier weten te brengen. Want als je dan te serieus het gesprek in gaat, dan wordt het te zwaar uiteindelijk. En dan kunnen cliënten compleet dichtslaan uiteindelijk gewoon. En dan is het beter als het een luchtig iets blijft. En dan via een spelvorm blijft het meer luchtig. En denk ik dat het ook gewoon beter vaststaat.
Super. En zou je zelf samenspraak gebruiken?
Op dit moment niet, want op dit moment ben ik nog net iets te jong uiteindelijk om zelf samenspraak te gebruiken. Maar op het moment dat ik iets ouder ben, dan lijkt me het heel leuk om te gaan gebruiken. Ja, op het moment dat ik er dan niet meer ben uiteindelijk, dat mijn broer en mijn zus en mijn familie uiteindelijk de juiste wens had.
Dit is de samenspraakdoos die we dus met z'n allen ontwikkeld hebben. Is dat het voor iedereen mogelijk is om hier de naam op te zetten, een tekening van hoe je hem graag zou willen versieren. Zodat iedereen weet dat het jouw samenspraakbox is. En wat je dan in de box ziet, is dat er een spel ontwikkeld is in de vorm van een bloem. Met allerlei teksten erop. Dit zijn dus de kaartjes die erbij zitten. Dus het zijn kaartjes met teksten erop. En het zijn hele mooie illustraties die erbij zitten. En dan kun je daarover praten, ja, met wat je wil, wat je wensen zijn en wat je graag zou willen delen met mensen. Dan zit er een werkboekje in. En dat is een soort stappenplan. En er zit natuurlijk een handleiding in voor begeleiders of verwanten. Zoals je ziet zit het spel nu helemaal compleet erin. En zie je dat je eigenlijk nog heel veel ruimte in de doos hebt. En wat wij als klankbordgroep heel belangrijk vonden, is dat er voor mensen in hun laatste levensfase, dat er een herinneringsmomentjes in kunnen van wat ze meegemaakt hebben, van wat ze nog graag zouden willen doen. Maar ook bijvoorbeeld dat ze dingen erin kunnen stoppen van wat wil ik, wat er op mijn begrafenis of crematie gebeurt. Wat vind ik belangrijk dat jullie weten, wat mijn wensen zijn. En die kun je hier dan bijstoppen. Daar is ruimte genoeg voor. Dus dan kun je je herinneringen en je dingetjes die je graag zou willen, kun je hier in de box nog bewaren.
In deze samenspraakdoos zit een puzzelbloem. Dicht in gesprek krijgt de 50 ondersteunende illustraties, een werkboekje en een handleiding. Inmiddels is er een e-learning en een scholing gestart van samenspraak. Op sommige locaties zijn ook de samenspraakgesprekken al begonnen. Er zijn hele mooie dingen uitgekomen. Bijvoorbeeld een cliënt die door heel veel verdriet heeft van het overlijden van een vriendin. En dat is de begeleiding niet. Er worden nieuwe hobby's ontdekt en er ontstaan mooie gesprekken over het thema ziek zijn en levenseinde.
Oh, thank you. Heel hartelijk bedankt, all of you. Really interesting work. And as I said, this was an extract, so the full video is about 15 minutes long, and that's available on our YouTube channel if you're interested. That shows you a little bit more about the development process and also hears from the wider team of contributors to this project. And I'm looking forward to discussing this in just a moment. But before we get to the Q&A, let's just hear from our final speaker. And that's Rachel Silver, who was a colleague of our first speaker, Rosie. And I started my conversation with Rachel in a similar way, but as you'll see, it went in a very different direction. And again, Rachel, I hadn't met you before, so I'm really grateful, not just for you talking to me, but also for you allowing us to share this video on this webinar. Let's just listen to Rachel.
Being involved in end-of-life decisions, in conversation with Rachel Silver, Health, Dementia and Wellbeing Assistant at MacIntyre. Rachel's best friend Alison died of dementia in 2018. Rachel called her Pussy. We start the conversation with the story of John, who is going to die.
I can't mention it. I can't mention it. Something about pussy.
You don't want to talk about that?
I really hate that D word. I hate it. Thing about pussy.
So you don't want anybody to say the D word to you?
No.
No. Okay. Oh, does that make you think of your friend then, Rachel?
It is.
What happened to Alison?
I can't mention it. She passed away last year.
Did she? Yeah. You were such good friends.
Yes, we were.
Yeah.
But there's another person. He would have passed away last year. And that's my mum.
You think of your mum and of your best friend Alison. We won't look at any more pictures, Rachel. I've seen Alison in your film. She was lovely. She was sitting in her chair.
She was a diamond.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about Alison, Rachel? Because I've never met Alison and she seemed such a lovely friend.
Yeah, sort of dear friend to me and to my sister. 30 years we got together. They wanted to move her out, but I wouldn't let them. I keep thinking in my mind up here, if she goes, I go. Because what I said to the boss, Sarah,
If she goes, I go.
And what do you think Alison would have wanted?
Nowhere. She stayed by me.
So you spoke up for her then. You said what Alison wanted.
But I'm gonna go. No. She was a diamond.
It sounds like she was a lovely, lovely friend. In the end, Rachel, did Alison stay at home with you then?
Yes, she did. I always keep thinking of her every time I'm in bed. And then I was on her right-hand side, touching her hand, and she adores it when I do that.
Well, I think, Rachel, you did a wonderful thing for your friend Alison. A really wonderful thing. How lucky. What a good friend you've been to her.
Yeah.
Just one more question. You've had a really hard year when your mum died and Alison died. Do you sometimes think about, do you ever think about what might happen to you when you get older?
No, not to me.
No. Is that something that you'd ever want to talk about or think about?
I'm not going to talk about that.
Rachel Silver was talking to me, Professor Irene Tafriwijnen from the PCPLD network, supported by Sarah Ormston from MacIntyre Care. And despite having talked about the D word...
I like this lady.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. That was it was really moving to talk to you and to meet you. And thank you for telling me about Alison and your mum. I really learned a lot from you, Rachel, because it made me realize that really not everybody really wants to talk about, and think specifically about death and dying and thinking ahead. And at the same time, what you did do, and really it was a good conversation, was to talk about your friend who died. And I learned a lot from that about, what is important to you, and therefore what you might want really when you get older. So I'm really pleased to say that there are 4 of the speakers are here live to answer some of the questions, to talk a little bit more about this. So first of all, I'm going to go over to Hille Vos. Hille is a postdoctoral researcher from the Institute for Health Services Research in the Netherlands. And she has just completed a PhD in advanced care planning with people with intellectual disabilities. But Hille, you've also spent some time in Australia with Jo Watson, and of course Australia is now asleep, so she can't be here with us. So thank you very much for being part of Jo's team as well, for answering some of our questions. And the things that I would like to talk a little bit more about, I thought her description of the importance of storytelling and knowing the person who may not be able to speak in words for themselves is so important. Can you say a little bit more about that sort of the importance of relationship and closeness? And I'm asking this because not everybody in the team that supports somebody at the end of life will know the person very well. There might be doctors, nurses, new support staff. So can you maybe give some examples and talk us a bit more about that? About how to do that, really, how to make sure that we know the stories and therefore we know the person and therefore we know what the person might want.
Yes, so thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to speak for such a large audience. Great to see that there are so many people interested in this subject, because it is very important. And supported decision making for people with severe or profound intellectual disabilities is very challenging, because they do not usually use speech to communicate. So they communicate in non-conventional ways and using behaviors and eye gaze and vocalizations that you need to closely acknowledge and observe. And especially for supporters who don't know the person very well yet, it can be very challenging to get to know a person. So it's very important to collaboratively observe a person and that you're willing to get to know a person. So that's a big difference. Willing to engage with a person, just enjoy each other's company, and that way get to know a person. And it doesn't have to be that you have to know a person for a long time, but just this willingness and openness to be involved in a person's life, share experiences with each other, also ask about previous experience of a person when they were ill, for example, or previous experiences going into a hospital. That's very important.
Thank you, because Joe Watson has written a number of really interesting articles as well, academic papers, and I think they're the only ones that I found that address, how to support people with a profound intellectual disability at the end of their life. I was struck really by her examples of, how you need to have a team of people around somebody to do this kind of storytelling, but also how possible it is therefore for people who don't know the person very well to get to know them through the stories that other people tell. So that just says to me that if you do involvement in end-of-life decision making, you need to have as part of your team those people who know the person and who love them really well, people who will miss the person when they're gone. They are the people, isn't it, that you think that you really need to have around?
Definitely, and who know their previous experiences and know some of their life stories and histories and can share them with the team, and also videos or images, and just sharing their knowledge about a person.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Hilla, for being with us. I'm going to just move on to the next speakers. As it happens, actually, all the speakers today are from the Netherlands, and so am I, so I'm at a double advantage here that I can understand the language as well. So the team that developed the In Dialogue decision-making aid, I'm really pleased to welcome them here, because you were actually meant to be here at our live conference in September last year, which was then cancelled. So it's really wonderful that you are now able to present your work. And of course, in the last year, you've done a lot more developing of this tool. I'm going to ask the first question to Freek, and Freek doesn't speak English, so I'm going to ask this question in Dutch, and I will translate his answer. But I've asked Freek what it is like for him as an expert by experience, who is quite new to this job and to this team, to be working and thinking about end of life. It's not an easy topic to be working with as a researcher.
Ja, in het begin vond ik het best wel lastig, maar ik heb wel hele mooie dingen mogen onderzoeken en ik heb mooie gesprekken mogen hebben met mensen over het leven zijnde.
Freek is saying that he found it quite tricky to begin with, but that he has had some wonderful, beautiful conversations with people about the end of life. So I'm going to ask Freek whether, therefore, what his opinion is about doing this kind of work and the importance of it.
Ja, ik vind het heel essentieel dat dit onderzoek gebeurt, zodat cliënten met een verstandelijke beperking echt die zorg krijgen die voor hen belangrijk is. Dat is zo belangrijk.
Yeah. Okay, so Freek is saying he thinks it's essential that this kind of research is being done, so that people with an intellectual disability at the end of life can get the care that they need, that is right for them. So thank you, Freek. Thank you very much. I'm going to just also ask some questions of your teammate, that is Hannah Noorland. And Hannah is a junior researcher at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Now, Hannah, I know you've been working on this project since it started, and we've seen what you've done and what you've developed, but I think since, in the past year, you've also managed to test it out. I'm interested to see how this works in practice and whether it works in practice. How is it received by the people that you're trying it out with?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We really enjoyed all the presentations. And we are indeed now doing a process evaluation of In Dialogue. And there are a lot of great results in it. So I would like to share a few quotes from the interviews we've done. The first one is from a support staff member, and she says, In dialogue can create a bond of trust. It also creates security and answers to questions that we would not have had otherwise. For example, the choice whether or not to have chemo. By speaking together, he dared to make the choice himself. So then he called me to discuss, and then I had to tell the nurses. It was a bit of a strange situation, but I think if he hadn't had such a trusting relationship, he would have stayed in the hospital much longer, because he just wanted to go home, but he didn't dare to express it. And I think that in the end, he did dare to express it to us. And another example, maybe, I found it a very nice method to also get to know someone's background better. Where does someone come from? What has shaped them in their life? So there are a few examples of what it does in practice, working with in dialogue.
Thanks, Hannah. And am I right in thinking that you're testing it out with people who answer sort of negative to the surprise question? So you're saying, would you be surprised if this person were to die in the next 12 months? And if the people say, no, I wouldn't be surprised, the staff, then they are offered the opportunity to use this tool. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So can I ask, how do you find that some staff actually don't want to do it, or think actually this is too difficult, or we can't, because the people they're doing this with are not necessarily dying, are they? They're not necessarily terminally ill.
Sometimes they find it really difficult. So we have special people in our training. So we developed an in dialogue training and e-learning. And in the training, the physical training, they are allowed to practice with in dialogue. So they have the opportunity to practice the cases they really find difficult. And that way, that helps them a lot to do the practice, to do the conversations in practice.
Okay, thanks, because I think it's really useful to have other tools, and I'm also going to bring in Michael Echtelt, because we've only got a few minutes left, and I do want to put you on the screen, Michael, because you are Professor Michael Echtelt is Professor of Intellectual Disability of End-of-Life Care at Avans University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And just to see whether you've got any sort of final comments that you want to make about this, and about, you know, the use of your work, really.
Just to say thank you very much for having me, and you know, I really feel bad not having followed more of these seminars, because they are really brilliant. Those were excellent presentations, fantastic interviews you did, Irene. Such a nice person. So I love that, really. And yeah, well, I have just one addition. You know, there was one thing that helped the professional care workers who were a bit reluctant to start with in dialogue, and that was you know, general information and training about palliative care. So not all of them were familiar with palliative care, but general palliative care information was a part of the in dialogue training. And well, personally, I believe that helped many of them to see that palliative care is not only for taking care of people who are, you know, days or perhaps weeks away from dying, but it's in fact it's helping people to live a better life until they die. So that kind of spoke to them, and in the end got them to participate in the study and to use in dialogue.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid that's probably all we've got time for in terms of questions. I know it seems a little bit short, but that's always the way with that. But I think this is just such an important topic and something we have to think about a lot more. It seems to me that, I mean, certainly not one size fits all, and everybody, as you also have seen in the pre-recorded conversations we had with people, everybody's different. So some people will want to talk about it, some people won't want to talk about it. But, you know, this whole thing of relationships is also interesting, and how you involve people who don't understand pictures and don't understand words. Having a new tool, somebody asked whether it's going to be translated into English. I think we are looking at that, or the team is looking at that at the moment. Personally, I think it's very useful and interesting, but I'd like to really test that in the UK to see how it is received here. The setup in the Netherlands is quite different, that the staff are much more trained, actually, and that's another a long conversation. But let me, that's, as I say, that's all we've got time for, and we will put the full recording of this webinar on our website, as I said earlier, and a fuller version of the In Dialogue video from this Dutch team will also be on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow. It's about 15 minutes long, so if you're interested in a little bit more background, then that will be there. You can also download a certificate of attendance that you'll have to fill in your own name, but you know, it's available if that's helpful for your portfolios. And it would be, I always ask this, it would be really helpful if you could give us a donation, even if it's, you know, however small. We've managed to produce 10 outstanding webinars free of charge. They take a huge amount of preparation, and the fact that we can do this is really thanks to so many people contributing their time free of charge. But there is also a cost to keeping this PCPLD network and these webinars going. The webinar series is a collaboration between the PCPLD network and Kingston and St George's University, where I am based. And we're really proud to tell you that we've just been given a National University Award for this webinar series. So I'm very proud of that. Huge thank you to today's speakers, because it wasn't just being here today, it was also all the preparations. It's been absolutely wonderful and really a valuable combination of insights into personal stories and research. En thank you especially, heel hartelijk bedankt to Freek, Hille, Hannah and Michael for being with us today. There will be no webinar in August. We're beginning to think about another webinar series starting in the autumn. So if there are particular topics that you would like us to address or would like us to come back to and do more about, then please either write them in the Q&A or email us to info@pcpld.org. We will hold a one-day online conference on the 16th of September. And I was going to say annual conference, but we haven't really had one of those since 2018. So it's very exciting that we have an event like this again. And there'll be a separate online event in the evening to announce the winners of this year's Linda McIntyre Awards for outstanding end-of-life and bereavement support for people with intellectual disabilities. So you can sign up to both of these events now, and if you're very quick, in the next few days, our early bird rate for the conference has been extended to the 16th of July. So you can book your place for just £30, which I think is really good value. Thank you very much. I hope to see you at our conference in September. But as promised, we will now end with some music. And this United by Your Music are a group of Dutch musicians, all of whom have an intellectual disability. And I first heard these musicians, and some of you may have also, last week at the IACID International Congress, which was broadcast from Amsterdam on an online congress. I think this song blew me away. It had me reaching for my hanky. I can't think of a more suitable song to end with than this one, which is I Did It My Way. Thank you.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friends, I stay it clear, then I stay my case, of which I'm certain. I live a life that's full, and every highway and more, much more than this. I did it my way. Friends, I have a few, but when again too few to mention, I did what I had to do.